Hey guys.
Hey everyone.
Oh, awesome. Just Patricia. David said that he may be a few minutes late, so we should start without him. So let's just give it another minute or two. We'll see what happens. Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me? Good.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
We've got Patricia too. Yay!
Hi.
Hello, team. Well, we're all here. David said that he could be a few minutes late and that we shouldn't wait for him. So since everyone else is here, great. I hope you've all had a chance to look at what I sent you earlier.
Yes.
And let's just start with people's thoughts and where we should, does this work on any level? What do we need to do?
It talks about rules of order. It doesn't particularly say Roberts. Is that a problem?
No, it's intentional because it's broader. It's capitalized as rules of order. It's to be a defined term. And the way I envisioned it when I was writing it was that rules of order, in Robert's rules as revised or amended by those rules that the board establishes for itself.
Okay, so will we just find that somewhere else? Will we have a list of definitions somewhere?
Well, it will be defined in the final text. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to be clear about it. That's fine.
But I wanted that to, and that actually is one of those areas where, you would have a document that we specifically supplement Roberts. I know last time there was talk about the need to actually review Roberts so we have a better understanding of what's in there and to make some, we have developed our own procedures that we, adhere to as a matter of practice, but it's an opportunity to maybe, put them down in some form so that when we refer to rules of order, we're talking about, the whole body of rules that we operate under.
I did attend by Zoom. There was some parliamentarian thing that was offered. Do you remember that from the borough president? I think it was like it was during the summer, early August. And one of the things the parliamentarian did say was that there's a new, he was talking about Robert's rules, and he said, and there's a new version coming, so you have to get the new version because there'll be changes. But so I think it's better to be a little, to allow for that. You know what I mean? Even he was being cautious.
Right.
He was saying you have to refer to the exact edition in some ways. So being more general is helpful, I think, because it doesn't block us in.
Right. Well, that's true. If you're using this as a defined term, you would say Robert's rules, X whatever edition or the most recent edition.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Supplemented by and then, this is something that is our personal list of procedural rules is something that we can develop, and this way, and it's much easier to change. It doesn't require a bylaws change, but it's incorporated by reference.
Yeah, I like that idea of saying
Most
the
recent?
most recent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lawyer thing.
Hey, that's why we have you guys around.
Yeah.
I have a question. You have that line about such behavior is considered unbecoming of a member and may be grounds for removal. How are you going to uphold that? And
Okay.
where is it going to be outlined?
Well, I didn't say grounds for, I said it can be a grounds to recommend it. With what we've got, there are other parts of the bylaws have talked about, what's expected of a member. And this is maybe something that we have to look at too. What's expected of a member? Just like, for example, attending meetings, avoiding, conflicts of interest. This is, if it rose to a level of sufficient seriousness, then I don't believe that we have the authority to remove somebody. There are other boards that have in their bylaws that this sort of an offense is grounds for removal. All I'm saying is that if it was serious enough, it would be appropriate for the board to discuss whether or not we should bring this to the attention of the borough president, for the borough president to take action, which could include up to removal. It could include censure, it could, whatever. And that's something to work out. But it's something that, because if it's serious enough, that we don't just sit on it, we take action.
Okay.
And I think that last time we did, I think maybe Carter pointed out that we don't have the authority to kick anybody off. That that authority rests with, as you say, Susan, with the borough president. So we couldn't unilaterally do that. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I would simply assume that if you don't have the power to appoint, how can you have the power to, remove someone? And even if we did, I think that has a very chilling effect. But I think we do ourselves as a board and the community a service that if somebody is really out of line, that we make the appropriate authority aware of this, because that only increases trust in us.
Okay.
And how we conduct ourselves.
I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in another Zoom meeting where people's background have been used as messaging to target somebody else on the board. So how would, our CB2 meetings have been pretty good. But it could potentially escalate over other conversations that we could potentially have in the future. How would we address that going forward in the bylaws?
Interesting. Well, conduct, that's actually an excellent, something we wouldn't have thought of before. Conduct isn't just what you say and do. It's like wearing a button that says something provocative. That's something to be fleshed out, that your conduct is your entire presentation. It's what you say, it's how you behave, it's the things that you allow to be seen. So if you hang up a sign behind you saying something outrageous, yes, you should be held accountable if that is, say, obscene or offensive or something. I personally, I would say that's totally inappropriate. It should be responded to.
Patricia, could you explain what happened? I'm dumbstruck by what you said.
I was in a school meeting. It was a CEC meeting, and a member on the CEC didn't like the resolution that was put before them. Whoever wrote the resolution, the authors of the resolution, and he had something really provocative in the background that said, it was like a personal attack on the authors of the resolution.
Wow.
But nobody called, the chair never called it out. So I'm wondering if we have something that comes before us in the future that's contentious, I mean, as board members sitting on CB2, even though we're appointed, I mean, if we're still virtual, that can happen. I mean, you could be in a brick and mortar building and people bring signs as a, you know, as their way of protesting. But I mean, in this area, in this virtual world, how could we address something such as that?
And that's a good point, because board members typically would never have had the signs, right? So if you go back to think about our in-person meetings, board members wouldn't have signs, but board members have worn stickers. Board members have worn pins. Presumably, I think, if I remember, board members have worn clothing, you know, colors of clothing, t-shirts, whatever.
Right.
And so it comes, you know, where do we go on a free speech part versus certain conduct? And I think that's a really good point, because we can hold ourselves to a little bit higher standard, right, as far as decorum, but we have to be very careful with the free speech aspect, you know, because there's a line, right? I don't know like where you define that, but that's something that's important to capture though, right? Because,
But when
because
conduct,
we clearly know when something's over the line, so we would want to leave room for that interpretation if that were to happen.
So I agree with you that there's a big free speech, you know, question here. And I myself have worn green and had stickers that said Save Elizabeth Street Garden, to name a few things. And I could see if there was a resolution against Elizabeth Street Garden, maybe doing the same thing online. So maybe it's just really, you know, these rules that are laid out, just saying that they apply whether in person or online, just basically saying that this also applies electronically, because it was really talking about what's happening in the rules of conduct. And so we don't maybe not have to be so in the weeds about you can do this online, but do you know what I mean? Like just say it just applies to online conduct as well.
Okay.
It applies to conducts in meetings, irrespective of because it's really only in meetings that we can, that there's any jurisdiction, and it's kind of like whether it's over the phone, whether it's in person, whatever.
Right. But remember, we're not, it's not about, you know, we do have a right to expect our members not to engage in things that distract, you know, in the sense that I don't want to, you know, filter or make judgments, but if something is distracting from the discussion, there is that element. I mean, it's again, it's got to do with the structural running of a meeting.
But you say that here.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, at least in my opinion, between that and escorting people out of public sessions, which I mean happens. And I mean, the ACLU sues, you know what I mean? Like it's big boy stuff. But I think we're trying to find particular solutions to particular problems. And I think that most of this is going to be decided by the chair at his or her discretion. And so what we're looking for, I think, are broad guidelines. But that begs the question of what are these? Because if it's not in the bylaws and they're not standing rules, then this is just kind of a guideline, and which is fine, but we just want to be upfront.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what I sent you guys is sort of aspirational. You know, what we would hope we all agree that we want to run our meetings as productively and as fairly, you know, and the focus on the issues and what's on our agenda. You know, to the extent that we have specific rules, they're, you know, content neutral rules. And, you know, that's why in defining that term, rules of order is not something that goes, those specific things are not in the bylaws, but they're incorporated by reference.
You know,
I guess if someone had a T-shirt on that said, you know, I hate John Doe, whatever it is, you know, that would not be the same as I support the Elizabeth Street Garden. I mean, right, Kristen? I mean,
I agree, and I feel like we lay that out here or Susan laid this out here very well, like just saying, you know, you can't use profanity, make disparaging comments, you know, so I hate someone is disparaging, or, you know, engage in other acts tending to distract from the attention of the book, you know, so I feel like we're laying that out in that broad way. And again, sort of making clear that, and I agree that this isn't just online or in person, it's also could be on the phone. Like there's certain conduct and more across the board, laying it out that it applies to all meetings. Because I agree, someone with a background that's really that's disparaging is just like carrying a sign that's disparaging. We wouldn't want that in a room, and we don't want that online either. But then, yeah, but then there's content neutral, right, Susan? Content neutral.
You know,
It goes to a little larger thing, which is, what about backgrounds in general? I mean, you know, why are we talking just about a messaging background? There are just certain backgrounds which are disturbing to the conduct of a virtual meeting. Like if you had moving images or flashing things or whatever it is, that it just distracts from our public meeting. And so in some respects, like messaging, even if it's political messaging, like, or we've seen recently supporting a political candidate, you know, it's like, is that stuff that as a board, you know, as members, that we just don't think is a good idea, you know, if you want to speak to something.
I'm pretty sure that's already taken care of in Roberts. I'm almost certain that this is covered.
Those are two good examples in the sense that if someone's got something going on that's literally distracting, it's like, yes, you would have a right to say you need to change that because people are looking at it and it's causing them to, you know, in the sense of it doesn't matter what it is, the fact that it is flashing, you've got flashing lights. You know, it's simply, it's detracting, or, you know, or if you have to, then you shut off your video if there was no alternative. But as to, you know, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought there. Go ahead.
I think Matt was right in terms of the things being a slippery slope, but I always feel, and this is my own opinion, that when we're hearing testimony on an issue, pro and con, we shouldn't have, I mean, obviously I'm a big advocate for Elizabeth Street Garden, but I'm not sure I'd be wearing a button that says Save the Garden if I'm running a meeting about Elizabeth Street Garden. And I don't want to be accused of not listening to both sides and making a judgment, you know, and I think that's our job on the community board, not to be pre-advocated one way or another, but to be even-handed in listening to what people have to say and then making a judgment, making a resolution as we see fit. But I would never myself be wearing a sign or a button or a shirt or a t-shirt on an issue that we're hearing testimony on.
Right.
That's the way I feel. I don't know how others feel about that.
But I think to Patricia's point, I mean, what we're trying to do here is say, that's not cool. That's not the way, you know, because this is about us, right? This is about as a board's guidance to ourselves in many respects, not to what the public is doing.
That's right. It's about us, right?
And I think that it's you know, I think that would fall under things that are not appropriate, that have already been listed out. But in a virtual world, maybe that's something, you know, that we need to be, that we just need to.
Can you explain exactly what you're talking about, different from the virtual world?
Well, I mean, meaning what Patricia was, it's easy for anybody to put up a background, right? And
right.
You know, for anybody who's remotely savvy in anything, you can come up with just about anything you want to do. If it's a moving image, a video, it can be, you know, stationary or whatever. And, you know, so the point is in person, you can't do that as quickly or during a meeting. You know, it's not like somebody's got a sign that suddenly they're scribbling out a sign. It's like, you know, I don't like Carter, you know, whatever, and the decision he's making.
Well, I'll buy one of those.
Well, I don't want to give anybody any ideas.
But
you know, it's
point of order.
But it's easy to do during a meeting, a virtual meeting, to do just that. And if somebody is really incensed about a topic, that's easy to do. And, you know, you put it a little bright or not having many people on there.
I understand. Okay.
Or you
what
put it
about
as
I
a
think-
picture?
At some point, we're not going to have virtual meetings anymore. So, you know, I'm not, for me, if we're discussing Elizabeth Street Garden, I'm not wearing anything pro or con. I'm just going to hear testimony, you know. And make a judgment.
But I want to say something else, because we've seen a lot of this in the political, you know, the people who are Zooming in or Skyping into all the political news shows. If they're an author, they have their latest book on display. Robert Costa had his living room on display, and then someone at the Washington Post gave him a big pillow, which now is the Washington Post pillow on his couch. So, I mean, there are ways that people are using this to promote things that aren't like nasty to someone or about an issue, but that's actually commercial. So I think, I'm not saying we should have to say something about it, but it's another aspect of this. And even though, David, we won't be on Zoom forever, my upstairs neighbor works for Deutsche Bank, and she's been told she's staying home until 2022. So that's a long time.
Sorry, Deutsche
you know.
Bank is staying home until 22.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Well,
what I'm
at least
looking over,
13.
so looking over what Susan wrote, I mean, is this covered under making disparaging comments?
But,
You know-
but it's nothing disparaging about Washington Post.
No, what I was
But
saying.
that's an interview. We're a governmental entity. We have a different standard to which we have to adhere. And David would be right in the sense of people shouldn't be wearing something, because if something is presented to us, if there's a discussion, it's like one of the basic things that we offer is a forum for the presentation of both or all sides. And that if individuals start to present viewpoints prior to a decision having been made, then we're undermining our function. So that alone gives us a reason to say, no, board members should not be wearing advocacy, using anything that's of an advocacy nature before we've actually reached a decision on something.
But I think the example that Patricia was bringing up is different in that I mean, from what I heard, and I wasn't there, and I know these CEC meetings are kind of crazy, that somebody put up something that was disparaging about somebody else in the background, and that's very different than, as of course people on the board are going to advocate for things before we have a vote. That's what we do,
Right.
That's what we do in discussion or in making a statement.
I
or
agree.
whatever.
What Patricia said was different.
That's very different. And so I think that, the section where you say being respectful of other members, it's the third or fourth line in the second paragraph. Members shall avoid arguing, using profanity, or making disparaging comments in connection with other board members or members of the public. I mean, I think in some ways, that would translate through to that, because it's a statement, right? From somebody in a background. They're still making a statement.
It's certainly.
I'm just trying to think about this, because, the less you say that covers more situations, the better. And that's a great real world example of what the world we're living in right now. And
Right.
so
Right. This is that kind of what's in there would be, for example, it would justify the chair of a meeting saying, no, you're going to have to remove, you're going to have to change your background because this we have standards and this would be it. This is, it's always a combination. Our bylaws or even any set of guidelines they're not designed to handle every little possibility. They're there as support so that when a chair of a meeting makes a ruling, he or she can say, I am making this ruling pursuant to this standard or this rule.
Well, we have rules of conduct that we can't use our position for personal gain, right? So isn't that if you have in the background an advertisement, buy Kristen's new book, then I'm using my position for personal gain. So I think we, whether we put it here, we're already kind of covered under that like as a conflict of interest question,
Actually,
right?
I don't think that is a technically a conflict of interest. Is actually narrower because it doesn't have to do with the matter that's before us. If you happen to have if you write romance novels and you have has nothing to do with what you do on the board, the fact that you've got one sitting in the background, well, if people pick up on it, I mean, somebody would say, oh, Kristen has bad taste that she's got to like hawk her books, but it's not actually a conflict of interest. It has nothing to do with your function as a board member.
And this also brings up an interesting point, Patricia, is that whoever is hosting a meeting, we're not under any obligation to allow somebody to share their video. We're only under obligation for them to participate and have their voice. There's nothing that says that you have to, that I'm aware of, that you have to allow somebody to display their video. So if there's something objectionable, you know, to the board's conduct.
Now you're hitting on something else though, and that's the idea of equal access. If you're going to say to one person, I don't like your video, you better have a good reason why you can't have video, but other people can. Because it's not a question of, oh, you can all hear. It's a question of, are you making a content choice?
I'm just saying to Patricia's point, if something is really objectionable, you know, at the discretion of whomever is running the meeting, that, you know, whether, and to Matt's point, you know, this is a big can of worms sometimes of a boundary line. But I think certain places are very clear. I'm just saying it's the gray areas of advocacy that start to be, you know, cross over into personal, you know, being personally disparaging of somebody else. But that's it.
There's also, I feel like we've wandered off the path a little bit. I mean, so one, there is a long and vivid history of parliamentary insults. They're brilliant. They can be done. They're talking, you know, the gentleman from New Jersey, you know, while you know, et cetera, et cetera. But this, I think we're way too specific right now. And I think we need to be, just my opinion, I think we need to be broader. So my point would be that I think that the text is a great preamble to either special rules of order or standing rules.
Okay.
What happened? Hello?
Can you hear us, Katie?
Katie?
I can hear you, but I couldn't hear Matt. Is Matt still talking?
No, I just stopped.
Oh, okay.
It happens sometimes. Rarely I stop.
Of his own volition, he stopped. And you're right, that may be what this is. I mean, I put it together, it's like, I'm not sure quite what this is, or how much we want to add to it, how much we want to use it as a jumping off point, but I wanted to have something for everyone to, you know, look at and help guide our discussion.
I think we have Michael.
I thought it was well written, and it's a good jumping off point. I thought you did a good job on it, Susan.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that, based on just thinking about it, is perhaps adding something about commercial, you know, no commercial, I don't want to say ventures, but, you know, that it shouldn't, it excluding commercial.
Commercial promotions?
Yeah, so that'd be great.
I do think that's covered by conflict of interest board.
But no, but it's not, because we're not. If we're not talking about if we're not talking about your book and having to vote on your book, it's the conflict of interest.
I don't think that's true. Employees of the city who don't have boards that they sit on that people would come in front of, even if they use their position for gain, even if it's totally unrelated to their position, it's still an unlawful gain. I'm happy to include. I mean, I have no problem including it.
You know, this one is, you know, God, if this is the biggest problem we've got, boy, we're in really good shape, because it's you know, when does something advocacy, because you see something, you know, if someone is a professional artist and they hang their art in their living room and you know, that's part of their Zoom background, are you then going to say,
Susan, that's, you know, that I think we can all agree that that's materially different than having a background that says, please buy, you know, my art, here's the website.
Of course.
Right. And I don't think anybody would argue the former is a breach and the latter is not. And
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Right. But that's okay. Let's not, like, we are getting off of, yeah. So based on what we've got, where do we want to now start to formulate a set of rules to supplement or modify Roberts? I mean, we need to think about the kinds of rules that, you know, what we do that's, unfortunately, I don't know that any of us have got that, except for Matt, has great familiarity with Roberts. Rusty, yeah, in the sense of there are things, God.
And a second.
You know, to know that what are we doing as a practice that is, that, you know, that veers from Roberts, but is, you know, it's our practice, and we want to, you know, make it, you know, those are our rules, and we want to, you know, establish them as our rules. Because it's very easy for someone to say, oh, you know something, I read Roberts and what you're doing is wrong. It's not wrong, it's just that we need to make sure that we've, you know, codified them.
It's currently out of order, but not necessarily wrong as an approach.
Thank you.
May I ask a question here?
Go right ahead.
Hi, this is Michael Levine. For some reason, my husband.
But I love you as Reynaldo.
That's my husband's name. Oh,
Michael, I thought you were one of those Zoomers who were like coming in and you know, I was like, this is hilarious. We have one in the chat.
We're both registered for Zoom, and for some reason it picked up his name. I may have clicked it incorrectly, but thank you for allowing me into the room. And it's good to see everyone's face again. I have a question a little bit off because I haven't seen the materials. I'm not formally a member of this working group, but I do have a question about what would be considered Robert's Rules of Order and what would be considered our practice. And that's what happens in committee meetings, who gets a chance to speak and at what time. If you will allow me 1 minute to explain what I mean. I understand that as a board member, I can always participate in discussion by asking questions of an applicant after a presentation. But once we go into business session, I've been told by one of the committee chairs that it's inappropriate, and as a board member, you can no longer speak in business session because you're not a member of the committee. I'd like to know, is that something, I don't think it's in Robert's Rules of Orders, is it in any of our operating procedures? Again, I have not seen the material that Susan sent around, but I'd like to know the origin of that rule.
I think David and I, both as chairs, it's always been our experience that if other board members come, I don't mean to speak for David, but when other board members are present at committee meetings, that it's generally been the provision that the committee chair allows them to participate in the discussion, but not the voting.
Yeah, I agree. I always do.
So then I'm going to
that's always been my practice and my expectation. Because if a board member is showing enough interest to come, they should be afforded that respect. And so I'm kind of surprised to hear that, because in my years on the board, I've never, ever, you know, I don't think really seen that.
All right, I'm sorry, Carter, let me explain what has been happening at one of our committee meetings, which I'm very interested in, and I'm on two committees, so I do attend some other committee meetings, and I have had questions for some of the applicants, and I was allowed to speak by the chair of the committee. But once the committee went into business session, the chair of that committee said, only committee members, no board members, and said, Michael, turn yourself off. You cannot talk during the business session. This is just between us kids on this committee. I was very offended by that statement. It was always my understanding that as a board member, I understand you're not going to vote for the committee vote. That is the committee's job, but you can continue to discuss the issue as the committee has gone into business session. So I'm wondering, is that written anywhere? The practice, as you're describing it, Carter, and as David did it, was to allow all board members to participate in discussion as the resolutions being formulated.
I think that I think there is something. It's up to the chair of the committee whether they want you to speak in the business section or not. I think that you're not supposed to. I think it's a courtesy. I always did. I think, Carter, you feel the same way about it. But
there's a lot of leeway that is given to the person chairing a committee meeting.
Some chairs don't want you to participate.
And there's an important reason for that, and that's because that type of conversation is supposed to happen at the committee level, you know, and not at the board level. And so if it's an important part of the discussion with the committee, that's where it should be happening, not bringing that to the full board when it's maybe a little bit more to what is being presented to the full board. I mean, that's why, you know,
I'm surprised that you're having that problem.
If you want to talk about this, don't not go to the committee meeting and then think the appropriate forum to change everything is at the full.
No, Carter, I agree completely. I would never want to raise an issue at a full board meeting in opposition to a committee report. But there are times where in the committee meeting, I would like to make a point that might change slightly what the resolution would be. And I have been told that I'm not allowed to speak. I would like to see, if possible, for this committee to consider as part of its recommendations for operating procedures that, yes, board members who are not committee members, of course, can question applicants presenting and can question people from the public who are speaking about it, but that board members, although they cannot vote on a proposed resolution, can continue in the discussion in the business session. I think it's very important. And as you say, it saves time at the board meeting because we don't want to be raising other issues at the board meeting when there are so many other things to discuss. So this is just a recommendation. I'm
not sure it's the bylaws entity. You know.
Well, I think though that the way it could be is that you know, the committee chair should afford the opportunity to board members to speak during the business session. It doesn't mean that they can participate, but that they cannot be silenced. And so if there is, you know, you can leave discretion in there, but you can't cut it out completely. And there's something, I think that there's a value in there to that, but
Thank you, Carter. I would appreciate that somewhere it does say, and again, reiterating that board members who are not committee members will not vote on the resolution, but can in fact offer opinions during the discussion when called upon by the chair. That might do it. Susan, I'm kind of recommending that as some kind of language that would help the problem I've been having in this one committee.
I would strongly second Michael, because I think that if you want things decided in committee, you have to afford members the same opportunity in committee as you do the committee members. Otherwise, and I do support that, but the flip side is if you don't do that, then you have to expect people to want to change things at full board, and I don't think that's the appropriate venue. But I think the easy thing, in my mind, just to make everything equal, content neutral, is to say, with the exception of voting, all rights of committee members are extended to any other board member, you know, in the meeting.
Well, that was what I was thinking, is that what you're saying in a sense is that all board members are, I mean, if you're a board member, you're a member of all committees, except that you're a non-voting member of all committees to which you are not appointed.
But that's
not
because
that's not, yeah.
I participate in business session.
I think just to Matt's point on this, you don't necessarily want to have them fully participating as committee members, but that doesn't mean that they can't have a voice. There is a difference. There is a difference, and I can see why somebody might hesitate for that, but that's not what Michael has been asking for. What he was, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were just not permitted to speak, period. And there's
Exactly.
a big...
I was told I'm not allowed to speak, turn myself off. And to be, again, just amongst us kids at this meeting, I was very offended by the statement of that committee chair who said, Michael, we're going to business session, you have to turn yourself off. So I think Carter is understanding my issue, and Carter,
You're
you were
saying there's
present
a
at
right
that.
to be recognized, simply a right to be recognized.
Right.
I think we all
during a-
agree on that. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
I've never
great
heard of this.
to recognize.
Donna's got her hand up too.
I just want to clarify, is Michael talking about being recognized during business session, or is Michael talking about being recognized at all? I'm understanding him as saying during business session.
That is correct.
Okay, then
Just to make a comment.
Yes, I just, to put my voice out there as somebody who's not part of this committee, I agree that you should be able to be heard during business session. I also, to Carter's point, to be a full participant in that committee, I think is a different category and not what Michael is.
I didn't think
Correct.
so. I want to be clear on what we're doing, because I don't want other, board members to say, wait a minute, I'm on a committee and yet it's not a focused group anymore. I agree with you, Michael. And of course, we all know the more that gets done at committee, the more hashed out anything is on the committee level, the better the board meetings run.
Absolutely.
So
Let's get the right language.
I mean, and this is an issue that's really at the forefront as we meet virtually, but I think that seeing the large participation that we've had across a lot of committees, that we may actually see board members show up in person at meetings going forward, just because there's a broader interest, perhaps. I might be putting a little too much out there.
you're absolutely right.
And so, a big part of it is that we can, as a congenial body, can all, participate together. And granted, when people are assigned committees, that's a certain level. But at this point, I assume that board members are able to participate. I'm kind of surprised to hear that they're not. I just, we can talk about that further, Michael, but the specifics, but I'm just a little.
There's certainly nothing that says that you're prohibited from, so I don't know what this chair is really thinking.
It's a board, when you don't have your rules clearly defined as to the scope of discretion, all you say is that the chair of the meeting has discretion, then that's why that's happening. But, and we can certainly, adjust for that. But, Carter, you're absolutely right. The meetings that we've been having over the last several months, we're seeing turnout like we've never had before. So many people are coming to committee meetings that didn't come before. So board members specifically are joining, they're going to multiple meetings a month. It's like, it's a real opportunity. So I
don't want to belabor the subject, but Susan, Carter, members of the committee, I would appreciate if you would consider some kind of language, which I heard mentioned before, that at the chair's discretion, board members would be allowed to participate in making comments during the business session as part of that guideline. That I would appreciate very much.
I don't think it should be at the chair's discretion. I mean, I think that it has to be, that by definition, without exception, a member of the board is allowed to proffer their opinion at, I would say to speak during executive, because in my mind, there's no reason why a board member should not be allowed to speak during executive. It's not like there's going to be back and forth between the people speaking and the public members. That's what's that business session. I keep calling it executive, sorry, business session. I know, me, of all people.
We just had to re-amend the bylaws because
I know. I think of like an SLA or what's the other landmarks where you have a lot of you could have a lot of back and forth between members and whatever. But during, like education, parks and what, like people should just be allowed to to talk. It just feels authoritarian, not right, but like very like rule, and I like rules.
And
It sounds
that's where
like-
just the broader language of affording them the opportunity to speak, it leaves that there's some room, whatever the situation is, for the committee chair to make a distinction between committee members and a member of the board. But it allows that opening for that contribution. And I think that might be the right, the right way of phrasing that.
Okay. But,
Say it again,
now,
say it again, Carter.
Just
What do you think?
that all board members should be afforded the opportunity to
Voice an opinion.
to speak during the business session. Doesn't mean they have to keep going back and forth as part of the discussion, but they're afforded the opportunity to
Yeah,
weigh
I
in.
think you should leave some discretion to the chair,
Yeah.
to unforeseen situations. Okay.
Especially because some of the committees are very technical in all their different manners, and that other board members might not have a familiarity with that technicality, but they can speak to whatever it is that they have, their points in, or the reverse, but it just.
Right. Okay, but what we're talking about now, what we're talking about is crafting our own sort of standing rules that are supplemental or in some ways modify, they're in addition to the standard rules of procedure that we've got. So that, I think that if that's what we're moving to, then we should be discussing other things that we do or that we think should be done that, as a matter of procedure.
This gets into the schedule of the order of business, basically meeting business, in that my guess is the order of meetings should be in the standing rules. I know we've talked about this, but it's not a behavioral thing, but just a procedure.
Okay. That's a good idea.
And I'm not
Matt,
sure.
could you
this
just repeat that? I was
Sure.
just taking a note on what we're talking about, so I just want to hear that again, please.
And your notes have come in handy so often. So it's insane. I was saying that the way we currently have it is the order of business, who speaks when is currently in the bylaws, which means it can't be suspended by a rule suspension. So if we need to change things around, we have no
we violate from time to time, we violate our bylaws simply because we reorder our meetings. Even though all the elements are there, the mere fact that we've reordered them means we violated the bylaws, which is ridiculous.
And just to, one of the things, I almost want to enforce them, because the public session, we can at least get through the public session without hearing from the electeds. Everybody only can speak for 2 minutes during the public session. It's not like it's been that long in virtual world, but the second you get an elected official or rep starting to speak, and we kind of throw out the window the whole beginning of the meeting, and it becomes less orderly. I'm just throwing that out. I really recognize that at this last full board meeting, we should have just let our 4 or 5 public speakers finish and move on to the next section. I mean, not to be too rude to the elected officials, but there's a point where, we need to conduct our meetings efficiently. But why don't we make them recommendations and that all the parts need to be included?
Right. There are basic components that have to be there in order for a meeting to be a proper meeting. It has to have a public session. It has to have reports from the representatives. It has to have a report from the chair and the DM, but it doesn't mean they have to be in any given order. I mean, that should be the chair's discretion on how to, best manage this, considering, all of the practical elements of the day.
I think with the exception that the public session the meeting should always begin with the public session, because the public wants to comment on items that are before the board.
Well, I would
Prior
agree,
to us
except
voting.
that when we have elected show up and we should give them deference and the elected starts the, if they're the first one there, technically, again, you're putting it out of order. That's why I'm saying that.
Well, can I just say something that's
go ahead.
striking
Go
me?
ahead, Katie.
In the past, in the not too distant past, one of the reasons we gave the electeds the deference is because, they had another meeting to go to, presumably. And we did hear Kavanaugh say he had 2 more meetings. So I don't know what the balance is, but I mean, I just want to be sure that we remember why we give them the deference. And I did get off the phone the other night and I told my husband how long it took us to get to the public, to get to the committee, hearing. I think it was 8 o'clock before we even started our own business. Or what?
8:30.
Am I remembering that?
It was 8:29 or 8:30, I think.
Our last meeting was good. We've had ones, we've run as long as 4.5 hours on Zoom. So
Very hard to cut an elected official short. It's very hard.
Yeah,
You were trying to tell me I could do it, David, weren't you? I mean,
I thought I wouldn't do it, but you could do it, Carter.
I told Carter I will not even attempt to time them, because if I'm sitting there with a timer and they're going to burn through it, it's just going to piss people off. They keep talking, there's nothing you can do about it.
Susan, I like it best when the elected official says, all right, I'm going to keep it short. Just go on forever.
Short,
yeah, exactly.
and quick. And it's like, something, we're going to wait for the person who says, won't say, I will be brief, I will be quick, this will be short. That's the person. That's right. That's who gets the prize. Okay.
Reality is different.
So what we're talking about is these sort of standing rules of order, of procedure, that I think that's sort of our next step, is to come up with some of these things so that we can, and these are things that we can share, the larger board. And it's like, what do people think of in terms of what's missing? What are they doing on committees that, so that we can have these as, a supplement or even to supersede Roberts. Because this is something that we would incorporate by reference into our bylaws, but these are not bylaws things for the most part.
Susan, can you hear me?
Yep.
Do we have already in our bylaws, meetings are scheduled only in accessible locations, ADA accessibility to all? Do we have that already?
That's a law.
It's
law. Oh, it's already.
Yeah.
It would be incorporated by reference.
And it's something that is that, without naming anybody on this committee, we've had ongoing dialogues because we have places that just barely meet accessibility with a little help, because it's a big challenge in our community finding meeting locations that are accessible, like under ADA versus accessible with a touch of assistance. Because it's really hard for us finding meeting spaces, and I foresee that being a huge problem when we're.
I always thought it was best efforts, Carter.
Yeah, we're going to have a huge issue with that once we go back to in-person meetings, because a lot of our partners
always an issue with me.
Want us there. Like NYU, I bet will maybe not allow us to be there, and a lot of the private institutions, just by virtue of safety protocols until.
Which is a really good argument if we wanted to push for the idea that we should be allowed to continue virtual, is that the spaces that were formerly available to us are not. If we're put in a position where we have to choose between what's available, and if those available are not, accessible, we're being put in a tough spot. I mean, that's actually a really good argument to be made why, virtual meetings should be, just sort of part of the future, or at least it should be something that we can consider if we have, we say there is no space for us to meet that, that satisfies the requirements.
Are you saying that NYU did not accept, if NYU does not have handicap accessible a situation that will be locked out of NYU. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that they may not let us in by virtue of issues, filtering out from the pandemic, just safety protocols going forward as we're in the transition period.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Susan, but it's the governor who's making.
Well, of course, what I'm saying is that this, as it is a very effective statement. It's not just dealing with us; it's dealing with any, all community boards, in the sense of any group that is now forced to choose. You don't want to put people in a position of having to choose between, do we have a space that we can use and that's not compliant, or having meetings virtually, which they are by default compliant. It's something that should be just sort of pushed up the ladder, because I think it's very appealing in the sense of it sidesteps a difficult issue, which is not being not accommodating.
Well, one of the things that Bob Gormley ensures that all of our meeting spaces are accessible. I mean, that's one of the things that he works on everywhere. So if I'm hard pressed to think of a space that we've met at that's not accessible.
I'm not suggesting that we
and
haven't.
There's some that have been not necessarily. I think there's one spot, I can't remember what it was, that it's accessible, but not like the ramp is not.
Greenwich House caught it.
Greenwich House.
Greenwich House.
Greenwich House. David and I said it at the same
The
moment.
question isn't that we've been meeting in spaces in the past that weren't compliant. The point is that going forward, the places that we were meeting that were compliant are no longer available. We've just been.
Well, NYU, like we meet at the Silver Building.
But guys, the point is that we can't meet at places that aren't accessible.
Right.
That already exists as a rule. And,
right.
And that's what Bob Gormley, we've had, discussions in the past with him about locations. And so it's something that he only schedules the meetings at places that are accessible. Right. So it just means that we may have to start paying for places, which we don't in the future, I mean, if we can't find places, I mean, but it's a problem that doesn't exist yet. So I don't know that we're addressing it here.
The answer is to point this out to those above us, that because the need, even if we can resume in-person meetings, the needs for social distancing and hygiene standards, that's going to be with us for years. That's what all the experts are saying, that we have to take into account the fact that the spaces may not be made available to us, or they won't accommodate the amount of space. Even if we could, the committee could meet, you won't have enough space to have all the public that wants to come in.
Well, but that's a great point, Susan, because one of the things that I think that we'll be meeting with a lot more applicants virtually for a lot of our committees, because they're not required to be in person and never have. It's only the board itself that's required to meet in person. And in fact, I think that a lot of applicants would prefer to meet virtually and come in on, and that's what we've set up the conference room for. It can do that, and it can be that right now, but nobody can meet in the conference room because nobody can be here. And it may be that we find another space that's larger that can accommodate our committees in order to do that in the future. But we're not there yet, and I think that's an entirely different conversation. And I think that there may actually be a lot more space available.
Right, because if there's going to be new rules post-COVID, like NYU Silver Building, which is one of our main meeting halls, they're going to have to change to let the students in. They have to make it more handicapped.
I think that this is a perfect topic for the reopening committee.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
All I'm saying is that there are so many variables here that
we are very off.
Virtual it just becomes clearer and clearer having that. But we're getting off. I don't want to get too much off the topics, and so I guess it's just a question of what other kinds of you know, procedural rules, standing rules do we want to see that we're, whether it's something we're not doing or people think we're doing it and it may not be something that's codified. I think maybe we have to take a look. I mean, I know I'm going to have to take a look at Roberts just to figure some of this stuff out.
Of course, the thing that bothers me most about Roberts is this calling the question business when, there are lots of people who want to talk for the first time.
David, you're in favor of this, right? You like when people do this?
No, I don't.
This is a really good example.
I mean, like
Roberts does create this. Someone calls a question, and that means you have to take a vote. And if you get 2/3 that agree to end discussion, you end discussion. We can change that. That's a perfect example of something that we should be looking at as part of our standing rules. And if we codify that, then it supersedes Roberts, and that becomes part of our definition of what rules of order means.
Okay.
So that's
David,
the thing that we're talking about.
Would you be happy? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Would you be happy with like a 75% vote threshold? Because I think that's what, I mean, you have to have some mechanism to end debate. I'm even as a defender of minority rights, I don't have a problem with.
I don't know if it has
25%.
to do with. But what I would say is in an example like this, I don't know if it has to do with a percentage or, for example, that every person who wants to speak at least once gets a chance to speak.
Yeah, that's fine. And we don't see it sitting there. I mean, maybe in a virtual meeting, but in an in-person meeting, the chair could see, how many hands are up or people who want to speak. And I hate when people who want to say something can't speak, because as soon as people call the question, oh, let's end it. People always want to end it, so because they don't see how many people are raising their hands. And I think the discretion for the chair to override it is where I'm coming from.
But, for that to work, it's got to be something that we establish as a standing rule for ourselves, so that we're not just running roughshod over the rules of procedure. It is our procedure.
Right.
Susan, I really liked yours, which was that every person is afforded at least one time to speak. And I guess, how would you write it? Would you write it that you can't write it that you can't call the question until everybody has been afforded the option to speak? Because that's not what you're going for yet. You could say that even if somebody does that, the chair would say that's premature because there are people who have the chair has an obligation to acknowledge people who've raised their hands who've yet to speak. It's a ruling that it's a premature motion in that case.
I'm happy with that, or some kind of
it sounds like this kind of list of standing rules is something that we're working. I mean, we've got 2 or 3 things here, and we can think about them, and then they just keep getting added to as issues arise, or as somebody has had a chance to look at Roberts and go, wait a minute, that's not what we do. And that it's sort of it's sort of an organic document. But because we acknowledge it and we incorporate it by reference into our bylaws, we've taken care of it on a bylaws level.
Agreed.
And there's also the aspect in that is that it is a preservation generally of a minority voice on a topic, because if you have 10 board members that feel very strongly about something, and the rest of the board feels strongly in a different way, what often happens is you get the mix of hands going up, and then the discussion enters into the 40-minute mark, and not all of the 10 board members who have the minority position have been afforded the opportunity to talk, but everybody sees where it's going, and then somebody calls the question. That's the way in the past that's really worked out, in some variation of that.
Right. I always thought calling the question is when we keep getting into a circular argument and there's a few people who keep talking and they're going back and forth and we're not getting anywhere, and we need to end it. But I feel very strongly that whoever hasn't spoken before should be given the right to speak before we call a question.
Yeah, I mean, why it happens, it could be that it could be a circular, discussion.
I
It
understand.
could be that something is running, it's just people, why? It simply is a procedural mechanism. What we want to make, and Carter used the term, protecting minority voice. That is something that we should be thinking about as we construct standing rules of order.
I don't know if it's minority. So people
Well, in
haven't
the
been
sense
able
of
to,
it is, or call it whether it's a diversity of opinion or whatever, but in the sense that it's a full, a developed discussion.
it's a what discussion? Susan?
It's a
Oh,
well,
that's nice. I like that.
I didn't say-
we're fostering a well-developed discussion.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
these are, so we should be thinking about other kinds of rules and, that can be added to this list. We don't have to, stop and say, we have to create a complete set of rules before we can move forward. We have some of these things, we can work on them, we can say, okay, this is an ongoing thing that people can come back to when they think it needs adjustment. But on a bylaws level, since we are a bylaws working group, by acknowledging it, we've created a placeholder. And that's the key thing here.
Okay, sounds good.
So, I mean, I can write up some of these and we can discuss them, and then we can put together, this is our standing rules, and then we can have the board as a whole talk about them and make recommendations, but it doesn't have to be something that occupies this group's time, in the sense that we don't have to get it. It's not like the election stuff where we need to complete it before we can move forward because of the nature of what it does.
I think that's a well thought out position.
Yeah, the only issue I have with it is by allowing someone else to speak by the wording you're going to include, the meeting is just going to be endless. It's going to go on and on and on. I mean, could these meetings run long as it is?
Right. Well, you have to wait and see what the language I come up with, which is why I put together a draft. You guys are all responding to that, and then we have something as a working, what we believe is a functional rule, and then we can present that, and it's like, okay, this goes on our list of functioning rules.
I have a question related to that. I'm sorry. I have a question related to that, to the calling of the question, and that would be a motion from a member of the board at a full board meeting, either to introduce a substitute resolution or an amendment to a resolution. Is there any kind of rule about how we must vote on that immediately? It's similar to the calling the question. Do we have to vote on it immediately, or do each of those, a substitute resolution or an amendment, have different rules that we follow? And
well, certainly Roberts does address this. Whether or not we have been following that, it's something that the best answer would be, we need to review what Roberts says, decide if that's what we want. If that's what we like, then that's what we have to make sure people are aware of, so that one of the most important things here is consistency. So if whatever the rule is, we need to know that it gets done the same way every time, unless there's a conscious decision to change the rule. If it turns out that what's in Roberts is not something, and we've been doing it differently, but it works for us, then that's the rule we need to put into writing.
Have we been following Roberts to the law?
I have no idea.
Probably not.
Not even close. So, I mean, just for an example, and I know I've raised this a couple times, and I think I said this to you, Michael, one time. Like, if you say I move to amend the resolution, I move to strike the first line and replace it with X, and I stand up and I say seconded, that's a vote. The person presenting the resolution has no input on it. He gets a vote. That's all he gets. Doesn't get a yes or a no. I mean, you can proffer a friendly amendment, but that's a friendly amendment. But if you move to amend something, which we never do, and I'm not saying that we necessarily want to. I mean, I always like having it in the back pocket, that no one else uses, to know that you can at any time do that. But, and I will say, I will only note that in the beginning of Robert's Rules, I do remember this, one of my favorite quotes is, you know, a rule of order not objected to is not a breach. You know, it's just, if nobody objects to it, it's not a breach of order. By definition, it can't be. So, you know, I go back to the blue slip idea, where you can have something that is, you know, agreed upon as, and so this was another phrase, Patricia, that I think we need to put on the list of antiquated things that a gentleman's agreement. But I don't have a different word. So it can be, you know, just a gentleman's agreement that, you know, we just all kind of agree that this is how it goes, but it's not really a rule.
It's you know, it becomes, it's a de facto, it's a rule of practice, you
Exactly.
know.
A rule of practice.
It's a rule created by practice. And yes, just the way you have rules that are created because they're passed as part, you know, they're voted on. You have things that are done by, they just become the ordinary course of business. I mean, that concept of course of business carries a lot of weight, you know, as a term of art. And if that's our course of business, then we recognize it. But we need to be consistent about it in order, you know, it's part of the authority of it. So those are, yeah, I mean, the amendments, that's another perfect example of something that needs to go on our list.
And I want to go back to what Patricia had said about meeting length. You know, it's interesting, meeting length over my time on the board has changed tremendously in where time is taken up. And now that we're meeting virtually, the time from public comments has gone down. The time from elected official comments has gone up significantly. We didn't start our business session until 8:30, but I think our meeting was over, what, at 9:45 or something?
Yeah.
So it was only an hour and 15 minutes. So, you know, for our time. So, you know, with those three different segments of the meeting time length, we end up with roughly the same meeting lengths, but the time is moved around between the different segments. And when we were meeting in person, we had a lot more people testifying publicly, and particularly when an issue came up. And, you know, then we had a lot less time on the elected official reports. And so I just throw that out there. It's like, it's very difficult to manage to time because of the different components of what add to a meeting.
Right.
And so I just say I'd hesitate to managing too much to that, because it's only controlling one section of a meeting. And our section, our business session, is, in my mind, the most important, because that's where we deliberate as a body on our own positions.
Well, we save time with the omnibus voting, that's for sure.
Yes, well.
Yeah, we become very efficient.
It's a very good idea. But well, I just
Donna has her hand up, I see.
as well, in that calling the question, you know, normally when the debates go, and I understand what you're saying, it could go on forever, but normally it's 2 or 3 people that are, you know, have their hands up and they're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I don't think that's healthy. I think though, I want to hear from other board members who have not spoken before, and I don't think that will go on all night. The chair has to run that and say, listen, I can't call on you because there are people that haven't spoken yet, and I want to give them a chance. And I think it's time management at the discretion of the chair. That's what I think. You know.
Well,
and
part of good management.
I think we're all there, though.
We are.
I just wanted to answer Patricia, you know.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know.
I'm sorry. Omnibus voting should be on that list.
Oh, that's a good point.
But I don't think that we should keep omnibus voting for when we meet in person, because most of our votes are done by a show of hands. That is not too time consuming. And I think that that's, instead of having because then if a board member leaves early, their vote's still counted because they voted on all the issues up to the moment. The omnibus voting is very much a time and a place, I think, for online voting.
Well, you know, we used to have sort of one of our unwritten rules was like open seat, in the sense of if we've taken attendance and you know, and somebody is there and then they've left, if their voted is counting in the majority until you take another roll call that you reconfirm who's present. The person who's left is going to be folded, his vote or her vote is going to be folded into that of the majority. Now that may be
that's classic Roberts. That's classic Roberts. You just
yeah, it is. It is.
Notice an absence.
And you know, I learned that because when I was first secretary and I was constantly watching back in the days when it was commonplace for people to leave the room and come back and in and out and come late and everything. It was like I couldn't keep a running tally until that was pointed out to me. And it's like, okay, now I know what, you know,
yeah,
how it was unmanageable otherwise. So,
yeah.
Okay. So we've got several things here to put onto our sort of standing rules. And I certainly encourage everyone to think about other things that they, you know, might want to add to this, you know,
I have one other thought, if I may interject here. And again, I'm not sure if that shows up anywhere or should. And that
you're
would
in
be
business session. You can't do that.
I think I'd like to call the question there, Michael.
Oh, please don't do that to me. I promise I will only speak now on this issue. And that is
Can you put in their 2 cents?
Always welcome, Michael.
for committee meetings, preparation. Some of our committees really are able to obtain for us advanced materials that we need to review, especially when we have complicated applications. And some committees are not able to do that. Is there a standing rule of any kind regarding preparation for committee meetings, either by receiving the materials in the hard copy mail or virtually or a link to a website? Do we have anything in our rules that regards preparation for committee meetings? And again, of course, the question would be, should we have such a rule? I'm just posing that as a question to see if you feel it should go on the list.
I don't know that that's a rule of procedure. I mean, there's a, like for example, with SLA, look, there is an application. You can't, you know, the committee will not hear an application if you haven't filled out the form and provided the information. It's simply a prerequisite. And I think each committee, because of its specific unique needs and the types of information, I mean, someone correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see that as being a standing rule.
It should go to all committee members in advance.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is sometimes the board office, and particularly with like a lot, in particular, there's the quality of life committee's materials. We don't get them in until literally the day of or the day before from the city. And so that's really the one committee I think that struggles to get them. Most of the other committees we've improved, and I've mentioned to Bob Gormley with the Sidewalks Committee back when they were hearing Sidewalk Cafe applications that we should be requiring electronic copies of those applications, not only for our own records, but also because they're easier to distribute to everybody as opposed to getting paper copies, which in my mind, that we would get one paper copy was kind of absurd, but you know, that's just me. But I think on most of the other committees, we get things in advance, but by virtue of the fact that the application-driven committees, we can't stop the process because we don't get something on time. And so making it a rule actually harms us more. We can make it a practice, but if you make it a rule, for example, on landmarks, if we didn't get something in on certain times, then we wouldn't have a chance to comment on it. Or for SLA committee, they're required to give us 30 days notice before they file with the liquor authority, which then begins a process there. And if we don't hear them, then that process can't begin. But they also know that they want to submit materials that match our recommendation, which also keeps their application from getting kicked out, you know, the general process. So I think it's difficult to make that a rule because I think it's something we already try to do as best that we can. But it's not to anybody's benefit if you don't allow for exceptions. Because then you just prevent it from moving forward. Imagine if we didn't get the 72 grand application, you know, for landmarks, and they're on the landmarks agenda tomorrow. And, you know, that's how quick these things move. So.
Okay. But definitely, you know, Michael, keep thinking about these things. As I said, you know, we'll put together a list based on what we've got so far. We can review it. We can just, you know, discuss certain standards. But this is going to be sort of an organic list that will be looked at as people see the need for something that's not addressed, or they see that a rule that we have been following should be changed. The point is that once we get this sort of as a starting point, as a good, healthy starting point, and we've kept that, you know, we've acknowledged it in our bylaws, we can move on. We can always come back to it if they think there's more, but we can go on to other things as well. So that's what I'm thinking. And with that being said, since everyone's getting tired, the only thing I want to let everyone know that in October, right now, we just have a meeting. We're booked for Monday, the 19th, but I would love to get another meeting in. I don't have the calendar in front of me, so I can't make, I can't make selections, but if Carter, I don't know what, if anything, is available, or how people feel in terms of, I know Kristen has a trouble with meeting before 6. How do people feel about Fridays?
I prefer them not to be like 5 p.m., but otherwise, sure.
And is there any possibility of meeting in the mornings, having a morning meeting? And if we're going to do 2 a month, we really should try to keep it to an hour and 20, an hour and 15 minutes or so. You know, I mean, that's the whole idea.
David, you don't want to call the question. I mean.
Yeah, I know.
I think,
so I just want to make two points. First of all, they're doing a whole reorganization of my department. Too much information, but it looks like that standing meeting, that crazy meeting that we had every day till January, it looks like that's going to be off the calendar. That's the first thing. And second of all, I'm sorry, but I can't do Friday. It's yeah.
I was just saying, you know, I know that the last executive meeting, when it was like there are no, you know, sort of open dates, I'm just trying to, you know, believe me, I don't want to meet on Fridays either. But I'm going to take another look at the calendar, and Carter give me some ideas, and I'm going to reach out to you, Kristen, because if it turns out that you can meet earlier, then maybe we can fit something in at a 5 or even a 5:30. If something, you know, another meeting could maybe on that same night, it can be pushed back a half an hour, or we simply keep this short. We'll keep this to an, you know.
It's short.
You know, we're flexible. We're a machine here, you know. I mean, yeah, you know.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna let you guys know, and I'll come up with some dates in the next 2 weeks, and people let me know, and I'll try to turn this around. And
are we at an ending point?
I think so. Now,
what are you laughing about?
Any famous last words before I say goodnight?
Just good job, Susan. You're doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, team. Thank you. Okay, guys.
Good job, Susan, from Donna.
Bye all.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Bye all. Bye all.